Okay, I'm ready.
Indie or AAA?
AAA.
IAPs or ads?
Ads.
Casual or strategy?
Casual.
You're listening to Level Up with Melissa Zalouf.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Melissa Zalouf, and you're listening to Level Up, the podcast for people who love making, growing, and of course, playing mobile games. Today on the show, we have Tatyana Bogatyreva, head of UA at Gram Games, and we're going to be talking about the differences in UA for ad-driven titles versus IAP-heavy titles. Tatyana, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Melissa. I'm really excited to chat about UA.
You're head of UA at Gram Games, as I said, but before that, you worked in UA for GSN and for Disney Interactive. How did you get into the gaming space?
I've got that question quite a lot. In terms of gaming, I've never really been a hardcore gamer. I've played like Doom and some of the Sega games with my father growing up. When I was studying finance in the university, I never really considered a career in gaming until in 2012, I was approached by Disney. And back then, it was really, I would say, quite exciting times for mobile gaming space. Everything was just starting out, especially user acquisition. Right. And I thought for me, given my background in finance, user acquisition seemed to be a really good mix of this data-driven role, but also with the creativity that advertising would provide. Very exciting times working with amazing Disney IP like Marvel. The CPIs were low. It was easy to rank in the top 10. I would say the industry was very different and less advanced. But since I do have a restless soul, I decided to really see the industry from a different perspective. So I worked for a mobile marketing agency in Berlin, particularly because I was really curious to see how different developers approach their UA strategy, how they approach LTV, to see launch plans, burst, instant traffic, everything. It really was, I would say, kind of a crash course because I got to work with Russian developers, American developers, e-commerce, and I was there really soaking up all the knowledge and I would say the best practices from some of the top players.
Did you feel that being on the agency side took you further from the game itself? And how did that impact how you approached UA? Because of course, having a bit of distance can be useful because it gives you kind of clarity of vision. Being further from the product also brings with it kind of a lack of in-depth information.
I definitely prefer the UA side, game developer side more because of, as you mentioned, the proximity to the information, to the developer team, really understanding the game and working with all the internal teams. That is what is missing at the agency, right? We get various KPIs. You're kind of putting together the pieces, an ideal scenario, but you don't know because you don't know the entire funnel. And that is what being on the UA side provides. And especially like now at Gram, the developers and designers make prototypes from scratch. So you're able to start being involved in the process from the very, very beginning. That helps tremendously in user acquisition, in understanding, for example, the core of the game and especially like how to market it, just kind of that connection. And that is the reason why, after working at the agency for 2 years, I wanted to go back to doing user acquisition.
What in fact brought you to Gram Games in the first place?
I still really was drawn more to casual or even like super casual space because of the broader appeal of the games and the impact that you can make on the industry because there are millions of players and there's an opportunity to make more impact, I guess more freedom, right, of exploration. And the other aspect that attracted me to Gram was the duality of this UI because when I joined, I knew that they're working on both ad-driven games and a new in-app purchase title, Merge Dragons, that just came out last summer. So for me, I thought it was a new challenge.
What would you say is unique in how Gram approaches UA?
Well, first of all, we have to make the adjustment and the fact that we're doing both. So we need to build the core tools, analysis, optimization, creatives, and then we're able to, I would say, pool the ones and adapt them to both ad-based titles and IAP title because the UA approach for each of these is actually quite different. It's very important to understand the limitations of each and truly see the target audience because as we would like to say, it's not really user acquisition, it's more player acquisition, especially when you're looking at the ad-driven side of things. We're really looking to drive engaged players into the app. So it's really figuring out the right approach and allocating the really limited resources of the UA team. We just have 4 people and also 2 marketing artists, right? So we need to split the time wisely and work with the right partners that are able, for example, to do both at scale.
And is UA a part of the thinking during Graham's prototyping period?
UA is actually involved from the very beginning. Once there's an idea mocked up, it becomes a prototype. And during the prototype phase, UA comes in and we have to advertise the game in a limited capacity and then give feedback in terms of the funnel metrics, IPM, CPIs, and then the game team looks at their retention. And that's when the decision is made whether to progress into the next stage.
You sort of find yourself being in the tough position of having to say, listen, this title isn't going to work because ROI positive UA isn't a viable option here.
So on our end, the decision primarily comes from the game team based on their retention metrics. We have kind of a framework for certain metrics, like day 1, day 7, day 14, that the game needs to hit. Obviously, UA can be optimized. Retention is something that is the responsibility of the product. So sometimes they'll go back and may fix it. But if the retention is not there, there's not much we could do on the UA side. But we try to work together. So we're not the bad guys that come in and say, no, we're not going to advertise your game.
Is it a challenge to run UA campaigns for so many new titles?
What we do on the ad-driven side of things is that because of Graham's years of experience and successfully, I would say, launching prototypes, soft launches, global launches, we've developed a very specific process of not only success of these, but also the ability to kind of predict the success of the title. And we have this process down and very, very developed that we follow. So this organization definitely helps. But just to give an idea, at any given moment, UA could be working on ideas, prototypes, soft launch, global launch, and IAP and UA for a regular IAP title, which is Merge Dragons. So we're trying to prioritize both and trying to do both at scale. And as I said, because of that kind of processes that we have on the ad-driven side of things and the automation, we're able to successfully release games every few months now. I guess that would be the goal for 2018, specifically in the Merge and the Idle franchise.
Graham Games is known for success with games that that as you said, have very low barrier to entry. What do you think kind of led to that focus on creating hyper casual games and doing so well in that specific category?
I would say it came about quite organically, right, with a successful launch of 1010. And from that on, it just carried over, like that initial popularity, success, both kind of at Graham and overall in the industry, helped really grow the genre. And I would say solidified as a viable business model, because back in the day, it was only freemium model that was working, monetized via in-app purchases or maybe kind of some of the paid titles. Not a lot of folks are really seriously looking at ad-driven monetization as I said, as this kind of a serious solution. If you look now, 2017 and 2018, so many companies like us, Voodoo, BitMango, Ketchup, that are relying on that for good success, right? And as I mentioned, a large portion of that is because of the reach to the millions of players. And in terms of Graham, I really believe that it's these internal initiatives of designing games and really perfecting this prototyping funnel. And it's also the iteration that we started on this Merge franchise. We don't match the items, but you actually merge, creating subgenres of the casual space, Merge plus Idle component, which is Merge Town and Merge Farm, and adding a puzzle component to that as well. So moving slightly away from the very super casual to slightly more casual. It's that innovation of the process on the pipeline that allowed us to continuously churn those out. And since I didn't really mention before Merge Dragons and I didn't want it to be left behind, Graham Games took a pivot and decided to launch last summer the first in-app purchase games, which is Merge Dragons, that has absolutely not a single ad in it. Right, which is a completely different pivot and a different approach, and both in monetization and the rest, because we believe that we could do both successfully, and it's a good balance provided to the super casual aspect.
How does UA differ from an ad-driven title versus an IAP focused or IAP only title?
So I would say overall, looking at the top line, there's a different life cycle and investment strategy in UA for IAP versus ad-driven games. Ad-driven games, the lifetime of the user can be anywhere from 7 to 30 days or more, really, depending on the type of the game, versus the 365-day plus window that we usually look at for IAP titles. Ad-driven ones have a much shorter production time, release. The approach, you need to maximize the user value in the first few days of the launch and then work on maintaining it. There's a lot more pressure during the initial global launch. As opposed to IAP, it is still important, the global launch, but later on you could still work on optimization, adding key markets and the rest. There's not as much, I would say, pressure on this short lifetime making an impact in the industry or in the user's minds during that initial time frame. And hence also like the KPIs that we look at for UA vary a lot between these two. For ad-driven titles, we're looking for high volume, low CPIs for non-instant traffic, and very high retention metrics, because that is what makes a successful player base for ad-driven titles. Scale is critical, retention is critical as well, as opposed to IAP title where scale is important, but you're still given more room to optimize.
Do you think that having to be faster responder to crack a UA strategy for a hyper-casual title faster has made you better on the IAP side as well?
At least I'd like to believe so. So what we try to do is exchange learnings between the two, because we don't split the UA team in half and say, one half works on IAP, the other half works on ad-based. We all just work on everything. What you could take from IAP is the really granular level of optimization. You could understand the value of the user down to the device level, like say, okay, Canada iPhone 8 user on a Friday is worth this much. That is not something currently that you're able to do on the ad-driven side of things. From the ad-based stuff, what we could really learn is really understand the importance of gameplay. And that is what I would say also separates the two, is the creative, because it's pure gameplay.
And if you are more limited in terms of spend with an ad-driven title, or in terms of let's say CPIs, what are some of the hacks you can implement to get around that? And do innovations like playable or interactive ads factor in as one of those shortcut or hack for saying, okay, I maybe don't have a huge CPI to play with, but I still need to get good scale and good quality?
Definitely. So for new partners that we're trying to integrate for ad-driven titles, usually tell us that the CPI is too low. No CPI is low if the funnel metrics are great. If the CTR is above average, if the IPM, which is the installs per 1,000 impressions, is amazing, it doesn't matter how low the CPI is, because the network will be able to make it work. So creatives, specifically on the CTR and IPM side of things, play a very, very important role. And then you mentioned playables. For us, they're a very core part of our creatives for actually both of the genres that we run. Because of the representatives of gameplay, because of the preview, the user from the onset is able to see what the gameplay is like. And for the ad-driven titles, more so, because the playable essentially gives away most of the gameplay and most of the things that you could actually see and do in the game within 15 to 30 seconds. Also, the funnel metrics as well match up for the playables, and we're seeing, for example, some of the highest retention come in from the playable units. So that for us has been a key driver.
How much a part does cross promo play in your UA efforts?
So we have a separate team that handles cross promo. We work really closely with our monetization team, specifically to understand the drivers of the ELTV of the ad-driven side of things. Like, for example, ad placements, ad frequency, seasonality of eCPMs. And because for the ad-driven side UA, right, you really need to try to understand if you're seeing improvements in retention because of what we're doing, or because of improvements in product, if there's new rewarded placement, or if there's a better waterfall implementation or things like that. And especially now with header bidding coming out, we're watching this even more closely, because we will see the impact for both of our genres and both sides of the UA.
Do you think a good understanding of monetization is key to do UA for ad-driven titles, or even to do UA in general? It seems as though those two sides of the coin are coming closer and closer together. Do you think that you need to have a good understanding of monetization if you're going to be good at UA?
If you want to do it well and at scale, I think it's important to have at least a basic understanding of what affects CTR, why some ad placements have higher or lower, why banners may not be so good. How does ad frequency capping may affect that? What is a win rate? How you could influence that? What is a seasonality, right? I think it's very, very crucial for the two sides to work together, because if you just approach it, on a CPI basis, ROI, you're just buying traffic, you may be missing some of the points or improvement factors more effectively. For us, I would say, I think we have a good overview of the entire ad ecosystem, because we buy ads to drive users to our ad-driven titles, for which then show ads for other games.
Right.
And then at the same time, we drive players between the apps, and at the same times, we sometimes buy ads from other ad-driven developers to merge Dragons or IP titles. So there's a lot of this connecting things.
Are you good at making sure all of that information is getting processed in one place? It's a challenge, right? There's a lot of different activities, a lot of different partners, a lot of different metrics, and yet it's sort of a virtuous loop of information that informs one on the other.
So first of all, we have a very flat hierarchy. So the relationship is very easy between the various teams like BI, monetization, and the UA team, and we're not a very large company. So the flow of information is easier from the onset. But in terms of data, we have a centralized place where everything is organized. And I would say we try to grow as granular as possible in that regard, and only just to understand why certain, let's just say, placements or ad types work well, but also go beyond and try to see why. Look at the actual app names and see, oh, why this app just got featured, the quality may not be so good. Maybe we shouldn't spend as much, or this app has more kids traffic that, for example, for Merge Dragons doesn't work well. So I would say we're trying to go beyond statistics back up to try to understand why are we buying traffic from specific apps and why some work more than others.
Speaking of the rising viability of ad monetization as a revenue stream, do you think ad-driven games will eventually take over? And this is a contentious question, and it's an argument I have often, and I'm not going to say which side I come down on. Do you think ad-driven games will eventually sort of take over IAP-driven games?
I think it really depends how the industry approaches it. I would say there's room for all the different types. Like, for example, there's us who are doing almost 100% in-game ads versus a few larger developers are now entering ads and doing maybe 20-30% of their revenue is driven through ads, right? And they're trying to make money off of non-paying users. There's a few there just focusing on cross-promo. I don't think one side will overtake the other. I think there's definitely room for all the developers to coexist. And I think it gives a really good flexibility for some of the newer developers or indies to choose the model that fits for them, not say, okay, I just want to do IAP or I just want to do ad driven, and maybe do a mix and like that. Because what I really believe is that, for like super casual players, they enter the space, and perhaps if they weren't given this kind of very super casual, low barrier to entry titles, they would have been on Netflix, they would have been hanging out with their friends, they may not have been in gaming. This gives them an opportunity to mature to other games, because we and the other ad-driven developers are a significant traffic source for users who, as I said, just idly sitting there, maybe playing on the metro, but slowly, as they watch ads, they kind of get upgraded to a different experience. It's a careful balance, but I in general, I think I'm quite hopeful. And as I said, it's important to have that flexibility and new, I would say, business models where you're not just attached to one or the other, also for UA, because the benefit of a traditional IAP integrating a portion of the ads is that if done well, you're obviously able to have higher CPIs for your IAP title and acquire more users, because you're taking into consideration the extra ad revenue, that is generated from the non-paying users. That may still be valuable, but just from a different perspective.
I agree with you, and I think that's a very the hopeful vision makes a lot of sense. But I guess time will tell. Thank you very, very much for sharing your experience and your insight, and thank you to all of you for listening to this episode of Level Up. See you next episode. PC or mobile?
Mobile.
Free to play or pay to play?
Free to play.
iOS or Android?
iOS.
Shower or bath?
Bath.